So I would like to welcome everybody in this grand finale session of our event. There have been 3 intense days. We've heard a lot of interesting things. We've done a lot of work on various projects, on various fronts, and we're coming to a close of this work. So I have a great pleasure to have with me 3 representatives of great institutions that have worked very hard before and during the pandemic in various fronts, and they have contributed quite a lot. So in this grand finale, we have the opportunity to hear a little bit from them on what are the legacies of COVID-19 in terms of technological development, new technologies, and how each one of these institutions perceive that legacy and what they think the next steps are to prevent having to live another one of those moments that we passed recently. So I don't know if Rebecca and David can hear us, if they're online. And I have here Dr. Ike James from Medicine's Patent Pool, who's joined me. All right. So, hello, David, Rebecca. So we have David Caslow and from PATH, and we have Rebecca Farkas from CEPI. So, very nice to have you all here. As I was saying, CEPI has done a tremendous work, has contributed before the pandemic on establishing a lot of the platforms that led to technologies that were used during the pandemic. PATH has supported a lot of the developments. MPP is supporting still, has done, and is still working with a number of initiatives that have come up. Specifically, one of them we're hosting here during these days. So I would like, first of all, to pose a more general question, have a few minutes from each of you to tell us what are the legacies in terms of technological development, what are the legacy that COVID-19 left us with for vaccine development, for other product development that you think is important. So can I ask with you, can I start with you, Rebecca?
Sure, happy to. Yes, so the COVID-19 pandemic really transformed the field of vaccines and the industry overall. There have been a lot of technological advances, and I think this is really where we saw the greatest successes in the pandemic. This was the fastest that anyone has ever developed vaccines, getting several vaccines available within a year, whereas in the past it's taken many years. And we also saw some new technology platforms that were validated, and this really marked the emergence of mRNA as a platform for vaccines, and also really showed the potential for viral vectors, adenovirus in particular. I think where the real challenge is going forward from the pandemic was ensuring that everyone around the world could get access to these vaccines early on. So while we were very quick within the vaccines field in developing new vaccines, the challenge was producing them at a scale where they could be distributed globally. And so that remains a challenge for us. But the technologies that were advanced provides a great opportunity for vaccines across a range of existing infectious diseases as well as emerging infectious diseases.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, so first, let me just thank you for the kind invitation to join this concluding panel with my colleagues from CEPI and Medicine Patent Pool. So my remarks will take us back to actually the opening panel discussion, which highlighted several legacies from this pandemic, including, it's already mentioned, a very large range of vaccine platforms, not just the immunogens, but also the adjuvants. So we've seen new adjuvants advance forward as well. The other is the impact on timelines that pre-investments in both the clinical and the CMC side of the equation can make. And as Dr. Akira emphasized in the opening panel, just a massive benefit from large public sector investments in this endeavor really accelerated things. I think we've also learned what it takes to scale up quickly and how importantly supply chains are. Supply chains before manufacturing to get the vaccine manufactured, but also supply chains after manufacturing to get it delivered. And then finally, I think we learned what types of evidence are needed for policymaking. So it's not just about getting vaccines emergency use authorized, it's also about getting them recommended for use and implemented. And I think Kate pointed out in her opening remarks some of the evidence that's needed by these policymaking bodies to be able to make evidence-based recommendations. And I sat on the COVID-19 vaccine working group for WHO SAGE and saw that up close and personal in terms of the gaps in evidence and what those challenges were in terms of making and trying to make the right interim recommendations. But maybe key for the biotechs will be to capture these learnings and figure out, as you had mentioned, how are they translatable to the next product on the platforms they're using. And I would point out, I think, really paying close attention to capturing as much as we can about what we learned from the process analytics and on the quality side of the equation from Pat's perspective. And a lot of the work that we do and we continue to do has been one of the most frequent barriers, which is the quality side of getting these products through the normative review processes. So I think I'll stop there with some opening thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Can I pass on to you?
Thanks, Satiris. First of all, thanks very much for this great couple of days here. I think spending time with you guys, as well as listening to these fantastic talks has really been great. Getting back to the question, I think Rebecca and David have covered a lot of the things that I had in mind. Development in terms of the COVID, I think from the initiation of the development to getting it out on the market was something that we can really learn from. If this is mRNA based and viral vector based, can this be implemented with other technology platforms as well? Remains a question. The speed that the technology transfers were also able to happen. So it wasn't only the development, but there was a lot of technology transfers that was happening in a very small space of time. Generally a technology transfer can take, a good part of a year, and industries were doing it within 3 months as well. So this was something that for other technology transfers going forward is something that we could also challenge. David also mentioned supply chain. I think there's been a now transition with the COVID to because of the short space of time in terms of equipment and that thing and that type of thing. There was a focus on single use, getting it there quickly, bypassing things like cleaning, validation, etc. So I would like to I'd be interested to see how the industry and the development phase takes on new products as well, seeing what they've seen the benefits from these COVID technologies. And then obviously, the fact that we were talking about, the release of the COVID for emergency use. Now, other products that we put through the regulatory pathway for approval and release, how will this look like going forward? Are we going to be looking at aggressive timelines? I'm sure we didn't cut any corners. We just, rationally went through the process for COVID. But how does this look like going forward for other products, as well as, in this case, emergency use products? Let me stop it there as well.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's interesting. I had a different question to put, but I'll take the hint of Ike and discuss that a little bit longer, because this has been our experience here in Biomanguinhos as well. We usually we always did technology transfer. We started with technology transfers, but our time scale was several years to complete a technology transfer. And with COVID, we managed to do that in a few months, and we now produce a vaccine. And obviously, the regulatory is another aspect. So I don't know how you think that the regulatory will deal with this, with vaccine development from now on. Are we going back to what we were doing before? And I know Rebecca said that we managed to develop in less than a year. The first ones came in some 250 days, more or less, if I'm not mistaken. Are we going back to several years, or are we managing to get those risks, financial risks that the governments contributed, the companies took risks to get products quickly? What's next in this respect? How do you think regulatory and vaccine development will look like in the next years?
Maybe I'll jump in with just one comment on that, which is that I think one of the trends that emerged and will continue was in using adaptive clinical trial design. This idea of not necessarily having distinct phase 1, 2, and 3, but bringing them together and being able to rapidly accelerate your clinical trials. And I see that becoming more commonly utilized, which could be used, even for non-emergency use approaches for commercial vaccines as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on this one. I actually think the thing that we can learn from this is to make these vaccine platform technologies as robust as possible in terms of the process analytics and the quality. And so that we've got these, which will be, hopefully will be almost identical no matter what gene sequence you put in there. And so that I think is a big learning from this. And I do think that we benefited from, this wasn't the first in human of an let's say an mRNA based vaccine. And I think that we should build off of that. I think, and the more robust we can make that, I think the faster and the more confidence we can have going forward.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to contribute to this question. I have another one for you specifically.
No, I'm good with that. Thanks.
Well, MPP is working very closely with the RNA Vaccine Hub. Both David and Rebecca mentioned RNA vaccines. There's no way of escaping that fact. They came in first. They had very good results. So, do you want to comment on how do you think the Hub initiative would shape that vaccine development future, perhaps? Or
yes. So, in terms of the Tech Transfer Hub, it is called the mRNA Tech Transfer Hub program. So, due to the fact that mRNA is able to give you a fast readout on whether the candidate vaccine is good to go, or you need to stop it right there, is a real benefit with the technology. So we've seen it as something that we can develop this technology and we can transfer it to our spokes using the hub spoke model. We are focusing on mRNA right now, but that doesn't mean that in the future we won't expand to future platforms. But for now, the WHO have decided to focus on the mRNA and use the COVID vaccine, to primarily treat the inequitable access to the COVID vaccine. However, going forward, we also are looking at other disease areas, region specific, that we could use mRNA technology as well, and thereby creating a sustainable manufacturing capacity within the low to middle income countries. and therefore allowing a pandemic readiness when we see a next pandemic surge.
Excellent, thank you. And PATH is also very much supporting that initiative. We have members of PATH here with us. They were in the first session. Rebecca, can I ask about the 100 days program from Sapien, and how do you visualize that?
Sure. Yes, so the 100 days ambition is to be able to complete all the research and development for a new vaccine within 100 days from the emergence of a new infectious disease. So we learned from the experience with COVID that it's important to have some fundamental science and understanding of your pathogen, so you know what antigen to target, and you have perhaps some research tools available that would enable an R&D program to advance. And so we're trying to make sure we have all of the foundations in place to anticipate a future outbreak that could be in any number of different viral families. And so the initial challenge is to try to identify what are the most likely pathogens that could emerge and become the next outbreak or even pandemic. And so we're currently working through that exercise. And then the plan would be to create a library of vaccine candidates that we hope could span the range of different viral families and classes. And it's possible that in the future, we might see an emerging disease that could be covered by one of the candidates in our library, or alternatively, it might be a virus that's similar to one we've done some work on, so that we could pivot very quickly for a customized vaccine. We're also looking at ways of creating broadly protective vaccines, beginning with COVID and looking from broadly protective vaccines that would cover different emerging variants for SARS-CoV-2, but also potentially other beta coronaviruses. And I'd like to be able to take a broadly protective approach to developing vaccine candidates against potential emerging threats, these disease threats. But it is a big challenge, and one that we're in many discussions. I know NIH is also, and NIAID working on this as well.
Thank you. It certainly is a big challenge, and well, nobody thought in the beginning of COVID that we would have so quickly a vaccine. That raised a lot of challenges, both technological, but also a lot of doubt at times in the public. And yet we have a lot of part of the world vaccinated. Equity still remains a problem. I know that I addressed a little bit that in terms of the RNA hub vaccines. But another thing that really I think COVID showed is that it's not enough to vaccinate only the richest countries that can afford various vaccines, but we need to have a global coverage. I don't know, before we close this session, do you have any final thoughts on that? David, you want to comment?
Yeah, maybe two final comments. One is just on the topic that you're talking about. And again, Dr. Kate raised it in the opening plenary, which is we've got to sort out early on in the pandemic which are the most vulnerable populations and make sure we've collected evidence in those populations in terms of dose and schedule. And that gets to be a little tougher, because I think what we're used to doing in vaccines is, oh, we'll vaccinate the healthy 18 to 45-year-olds and get all our data there. But that's not really where the evidence needs to be generated. So I think that's something that we've got to think about and learn about going forward. How many doses are required in an immunocompromised individual to reach protective immunity? And again, I think this is where the biotech and the industry can really help think through that. I think the other thing that's really key, a key learning for biotechs, will be to capture the learnings that are translatable to the next platform. And this really has to do, I think, with the critical importance of biomarkers. The biomarkers for initial protective immunity, for the duration of the protective immunity, and for safety. And these tools are absolutely essential, both pre-authorization and post-authorization, for all kinds of activities. And I think we're seeing right now play out where biomarkers, particularly things like comparative immunogenicity, or other people call it immunobridging, in terms of that role in authorizing new vaccines, next generation COVID vaccines, when to give a booster dose, and how are we going to get the new variants on these existing vaccine platforms authorized. And so I would also, I didn't mention before, but I would also highlight just the critical importance of biomarkers as we go forward. Over.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
So Terence, just to add to that, for me as well, we're looking at access to low to middle income countries for these vaccines. And a lot of these countries have no or limited manufacturing capabilities. And therefore the skill set in those areas are not existent. And so therefore they are reliant on others in the procurement of these vaccines from other countries. And in essence, if there is no money, they are last in line to receive access to these medicines. So the whole aim here for the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub is to transfer knowledge, transfer know-how, encouraging the establishment of manufacturing capability within those areas, and ensuring that there is sustainability within those areas until the next pandemic surges. And I think that the challenge there is the training, getting the skill set in those areas. We're not looking at massive $500 million facilities. We're looking at something more modular, something that doesn't take an arm and a leg to maintain. And we're looking at something that you can keep warm, generally warm, and when you need to pull the trigger, you can then access manufacturing capacity within those areas. So the whole concept is an empowerment concept for these countries, allowing them access to their own vaccine. So for us, I think it's a lot of work. We're looking at a spoke and hub model with 15 to 20 spokes. And they all come with different levels of maturity. And as I said, some of them have nothing at the moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a difficult challenge. And to some extent, this was one of the initial excuses, let's say, of the industry in terms of tech transferring RNA technology. It may not have been the reason, but it was certainly a good excuse. And that led to a lot of the countries join this initiative and try to get access through the hub, through the WHO training and so on. Dr. Akira has a question from the public, so I'll pass the microphone to him.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you, Dr. Kaslow. Doing well, yes. And nice to see also Seppi, Dr. Farkas, Ike. And it's nice to hear that the access for patent and so on. And of course, we have a tremendous technological legacy in this pandemic. And but I must say, we need more. we need access to tech know-how, you said. We needed access to know-how, not only patents. We needed access to technology. We need access to funds. You know, we need operation warps to develop neglected disease using the new technologies. We need a CEPI for developing countries, a CEPI supporting biotech in developing countries. We need a PET in developing countries, you know, and funds. How to get Operation Warp Speed Fund to develop this neglected disease and important disease for HIV, for example, malaria for us, you know, we have a different kind of malaria than Africa. You only think in Africa, but we have also malaria here in South America. So, how to do that? This is, I think, the big challenge. We have a legacy, but we must be able to use this technological legacy in order to make products required for public health here in developing countries, in South America, in Brazil. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Akira. I don't know if anybody else from the audience has a question. I would like to add to that we also need a supply chain. That has been a major obstacle for us. Sometimes we can't develop the technology, but we have to wait a long time for material to get here, for reagents to get here, and that slows us down and makes our production also dependent to a certain extent. So it'd be nice to have an established supply chain as well in these areas, not only the vaccine. But, any questions from the audience or comments? So we have a question from Alini. Do you think that with the great clinical results of mRNA vaccines for COVID, this technology will be more applied for the delivery of biological drugs, like therapeutic monoclonal antibodies? And would that quicken perhaps the development of monoclonals? Because there were a lot of development on monoclonals that didn't make it to the market. So you have any comments on that?
I can comment on that. There's definitely a need for some new technologies in the area of biologics, monoclonal antibodies, because as everyone here is well aware, you know, they're not well suited for global scale, and they're high cost of goods, very difficult to manufacture. So mRNA does offer a tantalizing approach to delivering monoclonal antibodies. The challenge is that you can't produce currently with our available technology the same levels of monoclonals through an mRNA approach as you can, as you would typically need to get a good you know, therapeutic approach. But that is something that I know several groups are looking into, and it may be with a highly potent antibody that you could have effective delivery via mRNA.
Thank you, Rebecca. Do you want to add something? We have another question from Alvaro. I think this is less technological and more question of a concept. Alvaro is asking the panel how to move to a change of thinking for the anti-vaccine movement in the world, and that comes principally for the richer countries, but it has impeded vaccination, even though there was excess of vaccine in some of those. I mean, we've seen here, and Dr. Akira is leading a great effort to increase the vaccination. Brazil traditionally was very good at vaccinating, but during COVID, all the rest of the vaccines went down. The demand of vaccines has gone down. But the anti-vaccine movement in Brazil has been reasonably low. We've vaccinated more than 90% of the population, but I think in a lot of other countries, this has not been the case. And there has been a problem perhaps in Europe and the US. So I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that. No? Okay. I guess that's a complicated question.
This is David. I'll go out a little bit on a limb and go back to what Dr. Kira was saying, which is I think we need to think about potentially a fundamentally different model than we use for developing conventional vaccines, most of which are targeted to high-income countries, and a model that's really focused on manufacturing and delivering vaccines to the lowest resource settings through public immunization programs. And that model may look very different from the one that we're currently using to develop vaccines. And critical to that other model needs to be trust of the products that are being made and who's making them and who's buying them and all that sort of thing. And so I do think, and I agree with Dr. Kira, it's probably time to take a step back and say, is there a different model that we should be considering here? Rather than adapting the model that we use in peacetime, which really focused for delivering vaccines in high-income countries with a kind of a dual pricing and kind of a second thought is to get them into low resource settings. It sounds like we need a different model. And I think we should spend quite a bit of time figuring out what that is, including, as was already mentioned, a sustainable model for those who are doing the local manufacturing or regional manufacturing, because I think that's going to be one of the key issues in the success of the work that that CEPI is doing and the Medicines Patent Pool and others in terms of these hub and spoke types of approaches. Over.
Thank you. We have a question from Paulo,
Yeah,
Paulo Lijo.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Okay.
I was remembering at the time how hard was to clone a gene before PCR. After PCR, PCR really made a big, huge revolution in molecular biology, in my opinion. Other things also made a huge change. But I guess that vaccine based on mRNA will be is the revolution for vaccines, because you can now make vaccine very easily, at least have a prototype of vaccine to be tested. And you can combine antigens, several antigens. You can make the vaccine testable for everyone can test vaccines now very easily with the same platform, with the with a very simple concept. So I guess that this will be the next revolution, and will make the vaccine more equitable to all the people. I do believe this, and I also think that in terms of regulatory issue, if this is true, we'll ease it all the regulatory issue too, because we will prove that mRNA vaccine is safe, is efficacious, so the regulatory issues will be easier too, in my point of view. And I just want to finish supporting all the words and letters said by Dr. Akira. What's the most important thing I heard here?
Thank you very much, Paulo. Well, I would like to thank you all. Thanks, Rebecca, David, and Ike. And thank you all for being here with us until the end of the event. It's been a great 3 days, and we've seen a lot of great developments, technological developments, which actually, in fact, have brought us together in this event. We were running it as an annual event, but we've lost a couple of years of our lives being distant one from the other, and it has brought the possibility to have you here, even though you're not physically with us. That has also changed quite a lot, but because we're all vaccinated and because we have these developments, we are here together. So thank you all very much. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you. And we'll pass to the next panel for finishing and awarding the best posters. Thank you.